Hey, this is Mike at Farm Table Foundation. Welcome to a class with herbalist Carolyn Smith on using plantain to make a skin salve. And she's an expert in lots of different areas. Some of you may have taken classes with her before at Farm Table. Of course, tonight we get to join her via Zoom. So thank you for your interest in being here. Again, my name is Mike. I'm the program director at Farm Table. Certainly recognize some of you all here, and you're welcome to keep your videos on if you like in the lower left-hand corner of your Zoom screen. If you hover over that, you can turn your video on or off. And basically, please keep yourself muted, as you probably are all aware of. That's helpful in terms of not having background noise. Our mission is to, our purpose is to rekindle connections between all of us and local food, local farms in the land. So we build community, we support conservation, we teach the local crafts around local food, including food as medicine, which is one of the things that Carolyn talks a lot about. And she also has worked with one of the farmers we directly support, Nancy Graydon, who has Red Clover Herbal Apothecary Farm. So Carolyn, please feel free to introduce yourself a little further if you'd like.
Sure. Yep.
And then folks, one other thing about the class, of course, as you probably know, in the middle of your Zoom screen, there's the chat box. And do feel free at any point to enter a question or have a comment. And Carolyn has emphasized to me, just interrupt her and get those questions out there. So please feel free to send questions in, and we'll make this as interactive as we can over Zoom. So thanks again for joining us, everybody. It's a delight to have you here. And Carolyn, please feel free to take it away.
All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the remote class in salve making. Again, feel free to pop up your names too, where we're all coming from. I think we can just do what we can to make this feel like a live, interactive, fun, engaging way to connect as a community remotely. So yeah, just pop up your name, where you're chiming in from, and I'll introduce myself a little bit. And again, I repeat, Mike already said this, but please feel free to interrupt, pop up questions when you get them. We can stop and answer them. He'll point them out to me if I'm on a roll. This is one of the benefits of chiming in live together, rather than just going on YouTube to watch a video. We can interact, and you can ask questions as they come up while I'm going. Yeah, so okay, a little bit about myself. I won't go too super into my background. Welcome to my office. I am a clinical practicing herbalist, teach a lot of classes. And again, yeah, my connection to Farm Table is through Nancy Graydon at Red Clover Herbal Apothecary. I worked as her farm intern in the summer of 2017 out in Amory. And I describe my background as kind of a sticker book of education, finding people to study from, various mentors, internships, kind of all over the place. There's no such thing as certification as an herbalist in the United States, so it's kind of putting it together as you go. So a little summary of where I'm coming from. But what I love, the two things I love most about working with herbs are getting to know the plants and having a direct relationship with the plants themselves in the natural world, and then working with people and helping people to understand how we can heal ourselves in subtle ways with plants in the natural world before we climb up the ladder to pharmaceutical technologies in the medical system. How I first got into herbs was through a teacher in South Minneapolis. Her name was Lise Wolf. And what I really loved about starting to learn the plants and recognizing everything that grew around me was that there's so much accessibility, and a lot of remedies grow right around us. I think a common conception with herbal medicine can be that things need to be exotic. Medicines and potent things grow far away, in the Amazon and the rainforest, and they're rare and exotic, but that's really not true. There are a lot of things that grow right around us that we can use for our health, right out our back door. So we'll talk about one of those tonight. So the relatability and the accessibility are really important to keep in mind. This is all very doable, and people people can learn to use and recognize and make these things for themselves and their health and their homes, for their families. So I like to pass the knowledge along that I've gained as I've gone and learned, and as I teach, in the spirit of accessibility. Really, we all already use a lot of herbal medicine in our lives all the time. If you feel like a beginner, you'll find places where it pops up that you might not have even recognized. Our not so distant ancestors definitely used and relied more on this knowledge for their health and their lives. Most of us, in modern times have lost a little bit of this connection, but it's definitely around in a lot of our lineages, and not so far away. So that's a little bit about how I approach things.
Okay. Carolyn, if I could just interrupt a
how I
moment.
see herbs and how I view my work. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention we do have Leah from Florida joining us. Everyone
Oh,
else
wow.
looks fairly local.
Okay.
One of the nice things about these classes is over the last 4 months since we've been on Zoom, we've actually had people from Australia and Canada and Nepal, so and all different time zones throughout the US. So it's nice to be able to do that. And
Fantastic.
I did want to say one of the things that I've appreciated about you, Carolyn, and how you describe what you do is that is about the healing of our relationships with plants or the rest of the natural world. And that I do think that one of the ailments of our society is a pretty broken relationship between ourselves and others, whether the other is perhaps another person but also with the rest of the natural world. And that relationship often has been seen as, extraneous, or like the earth is a stage on which our drama takes place. But so I really appreciate that part of how you approach your working with plants. And I think we can all learn from that. And that's certainly I hope something of which Farm Table can contribute to as well, because the food system and how we tend to get our food in this world, there's a fair amount about that also reflects a pretty separate relationship with soil and water and plants and animals. So just want to thank you for that.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Mike. That's a really wonderful way to put it. A lot of times I think of plants as, well, it sounds a little weird to say they're people, but I mean, it's just it's a silly way to describe and start to think about them as beings. Even I learned this from Robin Wall Kimmerer, who wrote Braiding Sweetgrass. She suggests people try and replace the word it with they, or some kind of other, more living pronoun, just to start to look at them in a different way as alive and as beings that we have a relationship with. So anything else to add on that?
I did type in there, I think it's Robin Kimmerer.
Yep.
Braiding Sweetgrass.
Yeah.
That box. It's a fantastic read. I have heard, and I've had it in front of me and haven't read it yet. So highly recommended though. Yeah, thank you.
Yep. Wonderful. Look. So what we're going to do, so how the rest of this session will progress is I'm going to share my screen of a slideshow. And so it's going to be more slide heavy from here on out. But again, feel free to bounce up in the chat box with questions. And we're going to go through the process of making a salve, and we'll talk about plantain, the plant itself, first. And I'll have some little video clips to show the process, so it's not just looking at frozen pictures or just a talking head. So I'm gonna start sharing my screen here. Thank you for your patience while I pull that up. Is that visible there, Mike?
Looks good, Carolyn.
Okay. All right. Well, here we are tonight, our little first slide. Couple of salves just in a picture to kind of get an idea of what we're working with here. So basically a skin salve is just, it's a convenient preparation of a plant infusion, or the properties of any plant really, or specific plants, or a formula or variety of plants, into something preservable, something mobile. It's, not as messy as a tin of oil or a bottle of oil, and they're generally used topically for the skin. So Move on here. So in general, making an herbal skin salve, if you're comfortable with the process, only takes about 45 minutes if you've got your oil infusion prepared already, which I'll show you how to do. So we'll go at this method or this process from a few different levels and ways you can approach it. And you can start at really any level. It's pretty basic. Basic ingredients here enlisted are an herb infused oil, which again, I'll show you how to make. But these are things that you can find commercially as well. So these are available to purchase. However, I've never seen a plantain oil sold or provided commercially. So that is something you would need to make. But I've seen St. John's wort oils or calendula oils, or you can find infused oils if you want to skip that step. So it's basically the combining of an infusion of an herb in oil and beeswax. That's a salve. That's a basic salve. You know, there's complicated things. You can get a little more sophisticated from there, but that's the basic one. The supplies needed are pretty basic as well. I like to use a double boiler, which I'll show you what that looks like if you don't know what that is. A low heat crock pot, basically something to keep heat low on your oil so you don't burn it. Stirring tools, a measuring cup with a pour spout is ideal, and a small tube or jar containers to put in when you're done. Okay, so the plants we're going to talk about in making a salve tonight, just to keep it basic, again, you can make a salve out of pretty much anything or an oil, but I'll focus on plantain tonight. And again, this is to emphasize the accessibility. You can pretty much find plantain anywhere, and I'm pretty sure all over the globe. So it's a pretty easy one to find. So if you want to start from collecting by yourself, which again I will show, you can get this plant material out there in the world, in your yard, from that step, that basic first step, and have that relationship and that connection to the plant. This is a real easy one to find. So the more general species that we'll find in the Midwest, North America, is the Plantago major. Other names for this is broadleaf plantain, greater plantain, ribwort, waybread, which has got an interesting history to it. White man's footprint is another name that it's got from. It was carried over from the European continent during colonization of North America. So it followed the Europeans basically to North America, and it was observed to be growing around the white man's settlements, and was named that by the indigenous people as they observed it following the colonies. Waybread comes from the travelers, and I'm not remembering exactly where this part of the world was from, but travelers making their way on foot and being able to find food sources along the way was really important, and plantain was one of those food sources. The flower stalk, which you can see in this lovely botanical drawing, growing up straight out as a stalk. Those seeds, as they dry and mature, are kind of a nutty flavor and are edible and can be used to grind into a flour. So that was a good source of source of food for travelers. And the flowering, I think you can see my mouse pointer. This is the flower. This would be the seeds. Temperate, herbaceous perennial. Perennial means it comes back of the same root system year after year, so that root system goes dormant and the plant will grow back out. Plantagenaceae, say it how you want. The plantain family. Families of plants are classification systems, so we don't need to go too into that, but a plantain has its own family of plants. The Plantago major is native to Europe and Asia, but is, again, widely naturalized worldwide. The parts we use in medicine are the aerial parts, primarily the leaf, so that means above ground. But again, the seeds are edible. Let's see, the name plantain, I've seen it or heard it pronounced plantain, but I'll say plantain. Derived from Latin plantage, the word's root planta alludes to the sole of the foot, so plant as in foot. Apparently this source says it's a reference to its flat leaves. It also seems to have an affinity for healing issues of the feet. So, and then the walking, it tends to like to grow in trampled soil. So soil that's been compacted through walking on. So there's that affinity or association with the foot as well for that plantain. So anybody who's wondering right now about what about this plantain versus the banana, I get this confusion a lot. This is a completely different plant than the plantain banana. So this is where I'm going to circle this with my pointer. These botanical Latin names are helpful. So common names can be shared by completely different plants. And botanical Latin names, each plant and each species has its specific name. The banana is a different plant, but it shares the name. So we're going to use the Plantago major and go continue on in the slideshow looking at images of that. But just so you know, there are other kinds, and I have seen some of these. So the Plantago lanceolata, or it's more of a longleaf plantain, I've seen in warmer areas, west coast of the United States, Europe. So it's very similar, but the leaves are a little longer. The flower stalks have a bit more of a stem and get higher. Plantago psyllium is really interesting. I haven't actually seen this, but if anyone's heard of psyllium, that is a product you can get commercially for fiber, digestive issues. That is a cousin of our Plantago major that we're talking about tonight. And then Plantago media, or hoary plantain, again, is something around. There are a lot of just examples of some different types of this plant family and species, but we will continue to focus on the Plantago major. So a couple images here, just to get you a little familiar with what it looks like. At this point, I'm thinking everybody's seen this or recognize that it's really common to find in yards, fields, especially fields that have been walked on and the soil's been compacted. You'll find it along pathways, hiking trails, right along the side of the pathway, because again, it likes that compacted soil. So just a little bit about how plantain has adapted and survived and lives its life. It's wind pollinated. It's propagated primarily by seed. So some plants will produce and propagate vegetatively, but it does really well by seed. Each plant can produce up to 20,000 small shaped seeds. So it does really well with the idea of sowing itself widely. That's usually an adaptation of plants that, their seeds maybe don't all survive, maybe get eaten, maybe go through digestive system. So they produce a lot in order to make sure that some of them are able to propagate and continue on as a new plant. Again, perennial, we talked about this, the roots survive over winter dormancy. The plant can regrow in the spring. So this is not an annual where it necessarily will die every year through the winter. And again, it likes to grow in disturbed, compacted soils, lawns, fields, along roadsides. And here's the quote: "The ability of plantain to survive frequent trampling in colonized compacted soils makes it important for soil rehabilitation." So it's able to grow in these areas where a lot of other plants have difficulty. And so because of that, and it can stabilize itself there and place its roots down into the soil, it can break things up and make the soil more available to other plants that have a hard time with that. So while simultaneously holding together to prevent erosion. Okay, so here I'm going to start with these videos. This is just a little, to get like a little live action view. It's kind of fun to hear. This is plantain, and it's one of its preferred habitats, just a gravelly road. Kind of get a little view of its silhouette, what it looks like in 3 dimensions. There's patches of it growing all over this gravel and on the edges. Maybe thriving isn't the word, but it's definitely growing there just fine. We'll see some thriving plantain next. A little bit of, I'll just kind of pop up this phytochemistry for anybody that's interested. It's not something I get too deep into, but if you're interested in kind of the active constituents or the phytochemistry of plantain that makes it an active medicinal. Here's a list here. Allantoin, I can't even say these all. If you're interested, here's a list. And we can come back to this. And it has studies out there with usually scientific research will focus on phytochemistry and describing, how plants work, and due to the fact that it has certain levels of certain chemistry. But ones we can kind of focus on here and understand are, I like to point out the mucilage. So when you put it in your mouth and eat it and chew it, you get kind of that mucusy, almost gross, snotty texture. That is very beneficial for skin healing. And then tannins are astringent. If anybody knows the feeling of a sour grape skin or a red wine, where you put it in your mouth and you get that puckery feeling, those are tannins, and that astringes or tones the tissue or the pores of your skin. So there's that skin healing. Those have some actions. Energetics is a way in herbalism to describe the states of plants. So usually you're talking about temperatures or relaxation or moisture. So plantain is described as cold and dry. It can cool heated inflamed tissue. So there's that skin healing again. And with the drying, the astringing or the tannins can dry out flux or just discharge. It's described as slightly bitter in taste. Analgesic means pain relieving, which is a great property of plantain. Gentle alterative. So alteratives usually mean it's helping support systems that cleanse inside of our body or detoxify. And that can refer to multiple different systems and organs. Vulnerary means wound healing. Expectorant means bringing up mucus or stuck stuff out of the lungs. Diuretic means it supports the release of fluids out of the system. So usually that's in the kidney, so retention of water. Demulcent usually refers to soothing the tissue internally. Astringent, again, we talked about that word, that's toning pores in the tissues. That can be both internal and external. Anti-inflammatory, so helping with inflammation. Antiseptic. Sepsis is a condition of the blood where there's poison or some kind of toxin present. So it can help with the sepsis of the blood or helping to cleanse the blood. Hepatoprotective means protective to the liver, which is our biggest detoxifying organ. So that can be important in a lot of different ways. Hemostatic refers to its ability to help stop blood flow if there's bleeding happening and helping your coagulation function. So there's some ways that it works. So those are fancy words, but getting into just basic descriptions of how we can use plantain. It's, again, we talked about it being edible, the seed, and the young leaves are pretty good in salads. I don't know if it's the best flavor or something that everyone would like, but you can eat them. They're not poisonous. Older leaves can be tough, but they can be cooked. It's high in a lot of minerals and vitamins. Looks like I stopped there in my list, but it is. It's got a lot of good things in there for you. So herbal first aid is what we'll focus on because we're making our topical skin salve here. So an amazing ability that is present in plantain is that it has a strong agent capacity. So what that means is if there's something embedded in your skin or in your tissue, it has the ability to help pull that object out. Not quickly right in front of your eyes, but over time it helps to draw out anything stuck in your skin. So think slivers, a wound like a scrape that has dirt in it that is, it can't heal without getting those things out. Stinger from a bee, anything embedded in the skin, the plantain will help to draw that out, which is really important in healing. Our skin can't begin to heal topically with objects in it, foreign objects. Tissue repair, just basically plantain helps to the skin repair itself or the soft tissues internally. Itching and rashes. So plantain is amazing for itching. I use it almost constantly all summer on mosquito bites, bug bites. I will use just the leaf itself, pick it out of the ground, chew it up, and put it right on a mosquito bite. It gets rid of that itch right away. So any sort of itching, topical skin conditions, amazing for. And the salve works just as well for that. I would say the salve might not be as strong as a drawing agent as the direct, but it does retain some of that property. So here we get that analgesic word. We get to see that again. So bee stings, I have personal experience using plantain on a bee sting. And I find that applying it directly to a sting helps relieve the pain. So that's what analgesic means again, pain relief. Though with a bee sting, they're pretty intense. I found that once the plantain is off of the surface, the pain comes back. So as long as you keep it on there, it really helps with that pain of the bee sting, and it really works. Skin eruptions, so things like boils. So again, you have that drawing agent that helps draw something that's stuck in the skin up out to the surface and healing the surface area of the skin. You can use it on burns to help heal burn tissue. Now, questionable with poison ivy. Everybody's so different with how they react to poison ivy. It can be so intense. I've talked to people where it works for them. I've talked to people where it hasn't. So poison ivy is an allergic reaction. It's not just a across the board skin irritant to everyone. So everybody kind of has their special allergy way of reacting to it. But it's something to try if you have poison ivy. That's always that just ongoing, what works to cure or help poison ivy? Who knows? This could be in your toolkit to try. You can also use it medicinally internally. We'll just mention these just because it's interesting. Your internal soft tissue repair, so especially in the digestive system for ulcerations and all that soft tissue in the stomach and intestines, swollen glands and stuck mucus. So well, you can use this topically to help, but I've learned from other people to apply plantain topically around the skull to move congested sinuses, stuck mucus in the sinuses. That would be an internal result of it. And other uses, which is just really interesting. It's got tough, pliable fibers that can be used for cordage, lines. I have not actually done any sutures with plantain or used any fishing line, but that's got a historical usage there, which is really interesting. Okay, so we're going to start from the step of actually going out and finding virtually wild crafting plantain. Wild crafting just means that you're finding it growing out, somewhere outside. You're buying it off the shelf, or maybe there's a line, maybe you're sort of growing it in the garden, or it's coming up as a weed in your garden. So some notes on wild crafting to be aware of. Now, plant ID is the first important step. So you want to be sure you know what you're looking at. Plantain is pretty difficult to confuse with other plants once you know it. But if you're beginner and your plant ID is beginner, make sure if someone pointed out to you, make sure you're correctly gathering 100%. You don't want to be using something that isn't what you think it is. In the Midwest, we don't have a whole lot of fatally poisonous things, but they're out there. And I don't like to talk about the plant world as dangerous, but there's stuff to be cautious of and aware of. So you want to be sure that you have the plant that you want, and so that it will do the things you want it to do. I like to, they're not paying me to say this, but I love this app called Picture This, and there's the little icon it looks like if you're interested. And it works really well. If you take a picture, and it actually brings up a lot of different options for things that are pretty similar, and it kind of nails it a lot of the time. But I would never rely simply on an app ID or a single photo in a book if you haven't had it pointed out to you in person. So just a note on ID when you're wild crafting. Make sure you're collecting the correct part, or the part that you want, so that it'll work the way you want it to. And when we're talking about different plants, plantain today, we're more going to be collecting the leaf, but when you're making different other medicinals, it might be the flower or the bark or the root that's traditionally used, or will do what you want it to do. So make sure and check and Be sure you're collecting the correct part of the plant. You want to be sure you're gathering around the right time, weather, or season. The nice thing about plantain is it pretty much is around and healthy throughout the growing season. So we're not getting super specific on our time windows, but there are some plants that, only flower. And if you want the flower, you have to collect it during the window of time where it's flowering. So there are some timing particulars to be aware of depending on the plant. And be sure that you're collecting healthy looking plant material. If it's rained recently or if it's raining, you might want to wait till things dry out. Rain can affect the medicinal components of the plant material you're collecting. And this is I always say this, it depends on the plant. Some plants that might dilute some of the components that you want. Other plants, it might stimulate some of the components you want if it's raining or if it's a different time of season. So this is always something to check with the plant. Be aware of the environment you're collecting in. Know your site. You don't want to be collecting anywhere that's been sprayed with pesticides or herbicides. I tell people to go at least 100 feet away from a road because exhaust and fumes from cars will be in the soil. So any contaminants in the area or in the soil will likely be in the plant because they draw their nutrients up from there and intake what's in the soil, and that will translate into your medicine. And this is another one, if you're collecting outside of your own yard or your own space, and which I do a lot, you want to be aware of the rules in the areas where you're collecting from. So different city parks, regional parks have different rules. State parks, it is illegal, as in not legal, to collect plant material if it's not a fruit, a nut, or a mushroom body. So just be aware of that. There are public land areas that do allow collecting. I know I was visiting, when I was out in Amory, I visited the Standing Cedars Land Conservancy out in Osceola a lot because that is allowed out there and it is organic and not sprayed land. Notes on sustainable harvesting. So we want to be respectful of the planet and the earth and the plants and what they're trying to do with their lives. They are happy to give to us, but we need to respect their lives as well. So do not collect endangered or threatened species, which another beautiful thing about plantain is there's plenty of it. It is abundant and in no way threatened. But if you are interested in a plant, check United Plant Savers. They have a website. They're based out of Ohio, and they keep an updated list of endangered and threatened medicinal plant species. Do not collect unless the plant in the area is plentiful. So just get a look. If it seems like there's a lot, go for it. If there's one plant and that's the one you want, I would leave it. Do not take from plants that in areas or communities of plants that look depleted. I like to practice giving back when I harvest. Give the plant a little water, help it by clearing an area for it, like weeding around it or planting some of its seed if it's that time. And then when I'm done making my medicine, I always return the plant material that I've used to the earth or compost it when I'm finished. So that's some just sustainable, respectful practices on harvesting. So let's get into looking at some more plantain. So this is just a little, see, it's right on the side of a walking path. This is like a deer path / people path. It's a little shadier. And it's a little more soily rather than just gravel. So these are some bigger plants. These plantains are thriving a little bit more. So there's the flower stalk coming up. They're real springy. They stand straight up. Hear that a little. It's fun to hear the ripping of the leaf though. So what you're looking at here, so this is the signature of plantain, or these parallel veins in the leaf. So as you pull the leaf apart, this is a way to tell if you have the right plant here. This is pretty specific to plantain. As you watch it tear apart, these veins will come out and they run parallel to each other. And another thing you'll notice in this video is as the plantain leaf is pulled, there's kind of an elasticity to it, so it's got a little stretch before it breaks. That's another signature or reference to the way that it works with the skin. So it's got that elasticity to itself and can help support the elasticity of our skin. Elasticity is a really important component of healthy skin. And so as you watch this, this is a way to collect and fill a jar in Wildcraft, your own bit of plantain. So what you would do is rip up enough plant material that looks healthy, green and vibrant, and fill your jar, whatever size, to the top. And I rip it up a little bit, you get more surface area on the leaf. That will infuse into your oil. Here, I'll show you that again. So basically, you're ripping up the leaf, filling your collecting container with fresh plant material. So this is a nice way, if you collect right into the jar or your container you're going to use to infuse your oil, it's a good way to not waste plant material. You only use as much as you need. So if you're out in the field and you're just picking leaves and you don't know how much you're going to need, you could get home and find that you collected a lot more than you need. So I like to bring my jars out with me and fill them. Then I'm just collecting exactly the amount that I'm going to use. This is a slide on drying herbs. So when we're making oils or salves, it is important to have dry plant material, almost always. And this is because if you have moisture, water moisture in an oil, it will rot or go rancid. So it will cause that bacteria to grow and your oil will go bad and spoil. So we don't want moisture in an oil. Now I would say almost always, again, there are always exceptions to these rules. St. John's wort, I'll just mention, is one of them. You don't get the active constituents out or as much out of St. John's wort with dried flowers. So I've made salves and oils out of St. John's wort fresh before just to get that component. But almost always you want your plant material to be dry to avoid that spoilage. To dry herbs, which I'll show a clip video next, since when you collect it, it's fresh and moist. Have a surface they can lay out on, spread them into, spready, typo, spread them into a thin layer, single leaf deep preferably, with minimal plant material piling on top of each other so they can get airflow to dry. Ideally, the surface will have air circulation on all sides. A screen on a frame that lays flat is a great way to dry plants, so you can have circulation underneath it as well. Or you can tie up your herbs in a small bundle and hang them upside down in a room to get circulation around them. Drying time of plant material will vary depending on basically the weather and the environment. So a humid time of year will take longer, as the moisture won't evaporate out of the plant material as fast, and it depends on how warm and cold it is. But on average, 1 to 3 days is about drying time, usually 24 hours. This also depends on the plant, but that is average. To test if a plant is dry, just crush it between your fingers. It should crunch and break up pretty easily, and you should hear like a crunchy sound, and I'll demonstrate that here in a little bit. If you're not going to make something out of it right away, you can store in an airtight glass container, because plants will rehydrate with humidity. If you leave them out, especially on a humid day, they will retain and reabsorb moisture. If you have a tricky setting, if you live down in Florida, if you live in a humid area, you could consider an electric dehydrator. Those work really well to dry your herbs if you need that.
Carolyn?
Yep.
Is there a difference in strength between the fresh and the dried leaves?
Good question. There can be. So you are losing a little bit of that vitality and that life out of the plant once it dries. And there are things that do, like volatile oils, which plantain doesn't have a whole lot, but volatile oils will evaporate. So there's a trade-off with using herbs dried. But in this case, when we're making a salve and making an oil, it is best to use a dried plant material first.
Great, thank you. And someone else
Mhm.
asked if we might be able to send out your presentation to them afterwards.
Sure.
Okay, and I would let you all know too, though, that this session is being recorded, and so I will, transfer that to our YouTube channel, hopefully tomorrow or the next day. Send you all a link to the video, so you can also kind of just forward through the video and find portions you want to rewatch as well. So that's another option, and I'll also resend Carolyn's handout in case you didn't get
Yep.
that. Thank you.
Yeah. I have a handout with the directions. It's a little more of a one-pager. But yes, absolutely, we can send out the slideshow. Any other questions any questions popping up so far on drying, collecting? Because we're going to move on. I'm going to show some little video clips of drying, but then we're going to move on to the salve making. Questions on plantain?
Don't
Good.
see any others as of yet.
Okay. So here's a little clip of so I've just got this little basket. It's got holes underneath so the air can move through. Once you got your fresh collected plant material home or wherever it's going to be, lay it out in a thin layer. And sometimes I'll turn it, I'll go back, after half a day or a day, turn it around. I like this little gadget I have because I have cats, and that little top screen keeps the cat hair out of it. You don't need that for it to dry well, but there's a picture of how thinly you want to spread it, at least. So again, you get the airflow is the important thing with the drying. So here, this is a little cooking show trick. This is not the same plantain. I'll show you the same plantain. I actually got this from the store because I did this all on the same day. But the way to check is crunch it between your fingers, check for moisture. It should crush and crunch. You should hear that. If you feel any moisture, you should let it dry longer, especially if you're using the cold infusion method, which we're going to go through first. So let me just stop here quickly to show you. We can get some sound effects maybe. So here is actually that plantain that I collected and laid out. So can everybody hear that crunching? Can you hear that, Mike?
Yeah, very well.
Okay. So this is breaking apart, and you saw the video where it had a lot of elasticity to the leaf, and now it's just breaking because it's dry.
And that would be dry enough to then start your process?
Yep. So once your material is dry, then we can start the next step, which is infusing our oil. Okay. So, and again, you can jump in at this stage and buy your plant material already dried if you like, and skip all the other stuff. So I'm just showing this again because it's demonstrating how full to fill your jar. So the important thing to remember with dried plant material is that it will absorb the oil as it sits in the jar, and it will expand. So you don't want to fill it all the way to the top. So that's a 4-ounce jar there. You can use any size you want, but I would fill it about 3/4 of the way full, 2/3. Give it some room to expand once it starts to absorb the oil. So, cold infusion. Oh, we'll just talk about infusing in general, and then we'll talk about what cold infusion and heat infusion means. So again, you can use any plant with this process. So what we're doing is basically the oil is a solvent, acting as a solvent, extracting the chemical constituents out of the plant material into itself. Some plants extract better in oils than in others. Oil is a specific solvent that will extract specific constituents, and that might differ from plant to plant, but it works relatively well. It doesn't extract all the plant constituents. Nothing does, but there are some solvents. Solvent sounds like such a severe word, but it basically just means dissolving. Water is a solvent. Some solvents work better than others. Alcohol is a very good solvent, which is why herbal preparations are done in alcohol as tinctures a lot. But oil is a good one. It doesn't do as well as some of the others, but when we're talking topically, it's a nice one to use for skin use. And again, we've already covered this. The plant material must be dry. Okay, so cold infusion we'll go through. It takes longer, but we avoid heating the oils, which can start to break them down. And there's a heat infusion option, which goes quicker, but then you're applying that heat to your oil, which can break it down. And that can affect your oil differently depending on what type of oil you choose. So on the topic of oils, there's lots of options. You can, menstruum is kind of an antiquated word, but that's basically the base or the liquid that you're dissolving your herb chemistry into. So we're using oil as a menstruum here in this process. And any oil you like. I like to use olive oil. It's just kind of what I learned to use, but you can use coconut oil. A lot of people like some of the topical prepared oils that you can buy in like body care departments, like almond oil or grapeseed. Those are all good options, but any edible oil is usable for infusions, just like it is for eating. I just tell people with body care oils or things that are labeled for topical use only, I just wouldn't use them the other way around in your food. So any topical body commercially packaged for body use, topical use are great. Lots of options out there. Coconut oil is kind of fun to experiment with because it has a solidity to it, which can kind of influence how your salve feels, because it under 70 degrees is a solid. And some oils will take heat differently, so just keep that in mind. Okay, so this is the cold infusion method, which we're not using heat. So all you have to do is, so that jar we filled a little bit of the way earlier, just fill it to the top with your oil of choice. I just had a couple set out there for a cooking show demo. And again, that plant material will expand, so leave a little room at the top, but I will generally fill it all the way. This is an olive oil. And that's pretty much it for cold infusion. I have another little clip here next. What's this one? That's all the broken up plantain leaf and olive oil. Here's another little clip of, I like to use a chopstick. You just don't get as much mess and spillage. Get all the bubbles out. Top it off with the cap. I didn't put this, these are in the directions in the handout, but it's very important to label your jar. So I put the label on the top because what will happen is as the plant material expands, the oil will most likely push up to the surface and leak out a little bit. And if you put a label on the side, it'll ruin your label. So put it on the top of the lid so you're not getting bleed on and losing your your label and what it is. And I like to put the name of the plant, the oil or the menstruum that you put it in, where you got the plant from, and the date. With cold infusion, it takes about 6 weeks to fully extract all the plant constituents that you're going to get. You could use it earlier, it just won't be as strong or as potent, but after about 6 weeks, you're going to get what you're going to get in that oil. At that point, all the chemistry that is going to dissolve has been infused. If you leave it sit longer than that, it's not really going to hurt anything, although there is a little bit more of a time issue with oils, as they do, spoil over time. So I would get that one
What
sooner
type
than
of olive
later.
oil do you recommend? Do you have one?
I like to get an organic kind, but I don't, I'm not a proponent of the more expensive the better. And if you're making a lot of these things, it can be pretty costly. So I go for cost effective. I get an organic olive oil at Aldi that I like just fine. Mhm. And there's some different ways that oils are extracted or processed that there's virgin olive oils and all those things, which could be its own class about how oils are manufactured and processed. But yeah, it's nice to go with the cold processed or the virgin or the organic. But if you can't get that, go with your what you like and your best choice possible. Does that answer your question? Were you looking for a brand specifically? I don't have a brand. Okay. So just make sure you didn't miss anything. Yep, again, just cap it off. Set it on a shelf for 6 weeks. If you put it in the fridge, it won't infuse as well with the cold. So I would leave it in a room temperature location, out of direct sunlight. Again, just 6 weeks, turn around and wait, and then you have an infusion. That's the cold infusion method. That's very passive. It works just fine. But if you want to make your oil and your salve that day, or you have presents to give out over the weekend, we can do this a little quicker and speed it up with some heat. So applying heat with the oil and your plant material will speed up the extraction process, and you'll get a good potent extraction in about an hour. You want to have low level heat, again, not to avoid burning your oil. So what I like to use, this is kind of an antique double boiler that I found at a thrift store, but you have boiling water underneath the container on the top. So that can keep the heat as low as possible on your oil. So you don't want to apply direct stove heat to an oil. You'll burn it. A low heat crock pot, again, works really well. So what I do is just put the dried plant material in the top pot, cover it with oil pretty well, and cook it on as low heat as possible. You definitely don't want to see any bubbles or boiling for about an hour. And with this method, so we talked a lot about the importance of drying out your plant material. If you don't have fully dried plant material and you use the heating method, you'll likely cook off a lot of that excess moisture. So having fully dried plant material isn't as important with the heat infusion method. You'll cook off a lot of that extra moisture with the heat. And then, so you want to let it cool with the next step. So we're cooking show style here an hour later. Here we are. It's been heating for about an hour. We have a good extract infusion in our oil of the plantain leaf. And now we want to decant or separate the plant material from the liquid so we can use it. So I just use a basic cheesecloth. I got these at Cub Foods, unbleached, but not expensive. A lot of people have nut bags or, whatever kind of strainer. We just want to strain out the clumps, the actual matter, the plant material out of our oil at this point. And you'll see why you want it to be cooled down, because you're using your hands. This process is the same for both cold and heat infusion at this point. So I'll put the cheesecloth or straining material. I'm going to put it directly into my spout pour, because the next step will be pouring it. And that's it. All we're doing is separating out the stuff from the oil.
Carolyn, could you use an unbleached coffee filter for that step?
I haven't tried it. It might rip in this next step, because to get all the oil out, I like a cheesecloth because you can actually manually squeeze it. But, just the passive filtering, it would probably work just fine. I don't know how well the oil would drip through a coffee filter, but you could try it. So this I like to be able to squeeze it. There's a lot of excess oil that stays in the plant material. And having some just manual pressure to pull all that out, you can get as much oil out of there as possible.
Carolyn, I
And
missed a bit of the process on the heat infusion. Do
Yep.
you have the water just simmering on low? You're not boiling the water either, is that right?
No, no. I usually have it on a simmer or low setting, the water itself.
As well.
If the water gets to a boil, it won't hurt the oil because you're double boiling it. But once it heats up, I turn it down to a simmer. Yeah, it just needs some good heat on. I don't have a temperature. You know, maybe there might be a temperature out there of infusing oils that you could actually test and make sure you have it at that temp. I don't have that number, but yep, on a low simmer, the water with the oil sitting on top for about an hour. All right. Again, now we've decanted the oil. We have a nice, so at the end of that last slide, or that last video, there was just the oil left, which, here, let's actually go back and see it. It's just a nice, olive oil has a green to it, but I think you can kind of, plantain has put this really nice green color into the oil now. That's a nice infusion. So the next step, and again, you could break off, that'd be a perfectly lovely oil or topical to use in and of itself. That's plantain infused oil. You could put that on a bug bite and walk away with a nice remedy there. But it's a little messy. It's hard to carry around. It's not as portable. So to make it into a salve, which is a little more solid, we just basically add wax for the next step. The proportions in adding the wax are key, but they can be varied upon your preference of what kind of consistency salve you like. So this step, we've got this, this is our infused oil. The proportion I found that I like is every cup of oil, that's a liquid cup. Oh, here we go, I'm demonstrating the types. This is just a nice chunk of beeswax I got a long time ago from someone who had beehives, which is just, it's lovely. But these little, you can buy these little beeswax beads at the store, or order them. They're a little easier to use and measure. So the portion that I found is 1 liquid cup of oil to a weighted ounce of beeswax, and I'm doing half an ounce here because I have about a half a cup of oil there. Beeswax is a nice addition to the oil too because it has a natural preservative, so you get a little more shelf life out of your oil by adding wax to it. So this proportion I found, you get a nice soft consistency to your salve, but it's not too greasy. If you like your salve a little harder, you can add a little more wax. If you like it a little more greasy, a little more liquidy, you just don't add as much wax. So again, there's some wiggle room in here for your preference in your ratio. So you just would adjust your ratio to what you like. And now I'm just getting ready to mix these together. So the next step is, one more time, we're going to add heat, and it doesn't take a whole lot. This isn't going to sit on the stove for an hour now. This is only going to be about 5 minutes. So I have an electric stove, but again, a low simmer on the water. Just a few minutes of heat now applied to, again, this is the infused oil. We've infused it already. We're only melting the wax into it at this point. So all you need for this step is enough heat to melt the beeswax. And depending on how, hot your water is, 5-10 minutes. It's just a little view. It's kind of fun to watch them dissolve as they melt. And again, I'm using a chopstick to stir. And at this point, once you get wax involved, you get a lot of sticking onto your utensils. So bigger spoons and things, you just end up getting more stuff stuck to your utensils. So the chopstick kind of reduces the amount of your salve that's getting on your utensils. That's that. So next video will show it actually, the point in time where the heat's actually melting the wax, the little beeswax beads. Doesn't take too much. You can use, and I can show these, you can use other things if you know you're vegan or you prefer not to use plant products, or you just have other options. There are other wax options of it. So there's melted candelilla wax, cocoa butter works pretty well. There's a lot of options other than beeswax, but beeswax is just nice and simple, and again, it has that preservative. And it's pretty traditional with salves, but not the only option. So here I'm demonstrating. If you want to test your salve before letting the whole thing cool, just put a little bit on a spoon and stick it in the freezer. You can test your consistency. Just leave it in there for a minute, pull it out, and just give it a little nudge with your finger to see if you like how greasy or oily it is. The freezer test, the freezer spoon test is nice, so you're not cooling off your whole salve before you decide if you like it. So if it comes out of the freezer and it's to this or to that, then you can add more wax, add more oil to get the consistency you like before you're cooling off the whole batch. The nice thing about salves, I like to say this, there's never a point of no return. You can always back up and adjust it to what you want. So you can always reheat it, and no matter what step or stage you're at. So can't really screw it up. It takes more time, but all right, this is the last step. So you're going to prepare your containers. You probably want to leave your salve on the heat source while you're doing this, or have it all prepared, because the minute you take it off the heat source, it's going to start to cool and set. So you want to have this all ready, and we can talk about containers and where I get them and what kinds I like to use, but we'll watch this step. This is a pouring step. If you like essential oils, you can add a few drops in the bottom of your tins or your jars. You want some scent or extra preservative. A lot of essential oils are also natural preservatives. This is important. Double boiler will have some steam on the bottom, so make sure that water doesn't get into your oil. Oil and water don't mix. And this is important where it's important to have a pourer with a lid on it. And basically you just pour out your liquid, your heated salve into the containers you want it to be in. I like to use these little tins. If you're pouring directly from a heated oil, use glass or tin and not plastic. You don't want to put hot liquid in plastic. But if you do containers, you can let the salve cool off and then store in the plastic. All right, then it just needs to cool off. And once it's cool, it sets. And that's it. I think it's fun to decorate the top with plant fragments or little petals. You can stamp a little signature into the surface, decorate your container. But at this point, it's all done, if you like it. But again, never a point of no return. If you decide it cooled for 2 hours in your tin and you didn't like the consistency, you can scoop it out of there and reheat it. I will add a little note here on the end from cleaning. As you can kind of see, as it's getting toward the end, the salve is starting to set even in the pour. You can scoop that out and remelt it if you want to get every last drop. But I would suggest wiping out your dishes with a paper towel before you wash them, so you're not getting wax down your drain. And there we are, voila. And I can show some other things, but we can just get into questions. Let me go back to my view here. So feel free to pop up with questions. Here's a candelilla wax, so that's a different option from the beeswax. Some other things, oh yeah, we did talk a little bit, I did mention a little bit about dropping essential oils. I'm not a huge essential oil person, but sometimes it's nice to add some scent. And again, certain essential oils, most of them have preservatives, but there are some that especially have preservative qualities. specifically rosemary, that will help keep your oil and your salve lasting longer. Grapefruit seed extract is also a preservative. If you're concerned about your salve lasting, you can add that. But here I can also show some different ones. This is a fun one to share. We talked about St. John's wort, if you can see kind of that pink color. So this is the one exception that I talked about using fresh plant material. So you get that, they call it the hypericin, which has that red or pink tint in your salve. So that's a St. John's wort salve. I've made salves out of cedar and pine resin, which is a beautiful scent. And the one note on those, if you're trying to melt resins, it takes a really long time. So I had taken they're like little jewels off the cedars and pine trees that the tree will naturally produce these things to protect itself from microbes at injury points. So you don't have to injure the tree to cause it. You can just find the little jewels that are dripping down the tree on the bark and collect those. But just a note on making those into a salve, it takes quite a while. So when I was making a resin salve, it was about 3 or 4 hours of heat to get the resin to dissolve into the oil. But it has a wonderful smell, and it's lovely for topical use.
Carolyn, there are a couple questions.
Yeah. Yes, great.
How much do you suggest using on a bug bite or sting?
How much?
Yeah.
I slather it on there. You could make a thin layer. Usually with bug bites, I've got to put it on every 10 minutes or so. So don't be shy about repeatedly using it either. But the nice thing this is another nice thing about adding beeswax and making a salve, is that it creates a protective layer on your skin that keeps the oil in contact with the point that you want the healing on, or the effect on. So applying an oil directly to your skin, you'll get evaporation and it'll rub off. With the wax added and in making it into a salve, you have a protective layer. So it forms sort of a layer between the outside, the air and the moisture, prevents moisture from getting in, and holds the healing or effective qualities of the oil into your skin. So with that wax component, you get a little bit of longer life out of your application. You don't have to put a whole lot. Kind of try it out and see how it feels. Everybody's kind of different how they respond to herbs, but I usually put a pretty thin layer. I'll show you a nice big, this comes from a glass. I have a big 8-ounce jar of salve from a demo. So if I've got a little chunk of it here, another thing that plantain is just in general really nice for is dry cracked skin. So I would put it on in just like a nice thin layer. Super nice in the winter for, when you get those just cracks up along your nail, the hangnails, where they just get dry and pull apart. I found that the plantain salve is really nice for that. And I like to kind of pack it in to get that little protective layer, and it feels good. You can kind of see weird remote camera trying to show you, but I like to leave a little bit more with the cracked fingernail stuff. But yeah, just a nice light layer over the top of your skin. You can kind of see the sheen. It's a little greasy. Some people don't like, the greasiness on their skin, but part of the healing. The olive oil and the beeswax itself too have skin restorative and skin healing properties. You have all that involved too, not just the plants you're using. So I think I answered that. That was how much you use.
What about the shelf life of your salve, and how do you know if it's going wrong?
I would smell it. You can usually tell if you've got a spoiled oil on your hands. The salves will last a little longer than the raw oils, again, because of the preservative qualities of the beeswax. But I've had salves actually lose color. So this is the one. I'll show it. This is a comfrey salve, which has got a little white over time. So that makes me wonder if it lost some of its potency or some of its effective properties. Doesn't smell like, it's a bad oil, but just use your nose. I would say a salve could last over a year, couple years on the shelf. You can put them in the fridge to help them last longer, or a cool place.
Great. And then what is St. John's wort and cedar / pine resin good for?
Sure. St. John's wort is known as a very effective nervous system restorative. So that means nerve tissue too. So if you have topical nerve damage, it will help repair nerve tissue in a wound. So that can help with pain. That can help just with regeneration of the tissues and the feeling. I don't have any direct experience with using it on frostbite, but I think it could be effective maybe in a case like that, or neuropathy, where you're directly dealing with nerve tissue topically. The St. John's wort is specific for nerve tissue. The pine and cedar resin, so think of why the trees make the resin for themselves. It's to prevent microbes and infection from getting into their injured areas. So the pine and cedar resin salve is specifically nice for wounds that have chance or already feel like they're getting infected and inflamed, to help reduce the microbial presence in a healing spot. And also it just smells really good. Yeah, so specific for preventing infection in a wound, the resin.
And someone asks if you've ever made a lemon balm salve, because she is growing some lemon balm.
Sure, I have heard of that. That I don't know about how much of that. Here's that plant constituent profile again. I don't know how much of the lemon balm would make it into the oil. You could look that up. But lemon balm topically is specific for viral infection that I've heard. I don't have any client or personal use with this, but like cold sores, it's a great topical use. Cold sores or herpes, any kind of topical viral issue that you're working with, lemon balm would be great for. So yeah, I would definitely make them if you're a cold sore person.
Great, thank you. Does anyone have other questions for Carolyn? Or Carolyn, feel free to show other things as you wish.
Sure. I will show this. So when I'm doing a cold infusion and I'm letting my jar sit for 6 weeks, just to keep things from getting messy, as the oil might overflow and leak, put it in a little dish while it sits.
But once the heat infused is done cooling, you can use it, right? It doesn't need anything any longer than that. Is that right?
Nope, it's all done. Yep, once it's cooled.
And then if you were to make a salve for the mouth, what oil would you use? And would you still use beeswax for mouth sores? Or
Yes, so anything ingestible when you're talking about the mouth. I mean, our bodies absorb through our skin, so you want things to be safe for the body in general, but especially in the mouth. Beeswax is ingestible and not toxic, so if you don't mind the consistency of that in your mouth, it is a little funny with the saliva and trying to spread a salve in the mouth, but I've done it. I've used plantain salve on just like a sore gum, or just like a sore mouth area, canker sore, something like that. It doesn't necessarily stick there, but I've done it. So anything ingestible can go into the mouth, and beeswax is fine.
any other questions, anyone? Carolyn, anything else you'd like to mention or show?
No, I think that covers it.
Okay, we do have one more came in. What herb would you recommend for skin moisturizing?
Skin moisturizing, plantain's great for that, but chickweed is another good one. So that's chick as in like little chicken, chickweed. So a lot of soothing, moisturizing components to that. that somewhat carries through when you dry it and produce it into a salve.
And of course, for all of us, how about a salve to put on mosquito bites? Is that the plantain as well?
Yep, I would use straight up plantain for that. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of other itch relief plants you could use, but plantain just works so well. I wouldn't really need to go any further personally.
Do you currently have a favorite herb or process you're doing a lot of these days, Carolyn?
Well, using a lot of calming nervines with people and myself in the state of the world, and you know, trying to stay relaxed and focused. A favorite around that? Well, I just found some the other day, some skullcap. So that's a really nice nervine, and it's calming for just a lot of overthinking and not being able to shut the mind off at night and being able to relax and help to sleep. Healthy sleep is always really important, just to health in general. So that's been a favorite, and one I just collected in the last 2 weeks. So that's skull cap, like skull named. Its flower and its seed are really tiny and look like a little helmet.
And are there other resources you'd recommend folks could look into if they so wish?
Sure. And I was just looking today up at some of my favorite websites. So there's a nice online, you can look up what they call plant monographs or materia medica, which just means it's breaking down individual plant profiles into, what the plants are, how they grow, how they're used, just all this sort of compiled information on herbrally.com. So that's herbrally.com. Some of my favorite books, I'll show you my favorite reference. Got the Book of Herbal Wisdom. This is Matthew Wood. He's in my lineage of teachers. Matthew Wood he's the main teacher of my teachers. So he's in my lineage of education and learning. And that book particularly, he's written many books, but the Book of Herbal Wisdom has a lot of Midwest or North American plants that you can find. And I find it, the way that he writes about plants and the way he writes about using them to be memorable, he uses a lot of storytelling and looking at just plants and their personalities. So very descriptive and nice to read. Some herb references can be pretty dry. You just get sort of lists of, diuretic this, and it does, da 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 da, and it doesn't stick. It doesn't feel all that memorable, and that's a really enjoyable reference to read.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Carolyn. Just briefly, feel free to ask another question if you have them, but in the meantime, I just wanted to mention that we've got a pretty robust calendar of classes, as most of you know, so feel free to visit our website, farmtablefoundation.org. We've got a gathering in our garden. For those of you who are gardeners, we're going to try our first in-person socially distanced outdoor class this Thursday night in our garden. So you could sign up for that on our website. And then we're going to move to the patio and have a socially distanced happy hour along with that. That's back in our Victory Garden this Thursday evening. And then we've got a gazpacho class. Terry Kelzer, one of our favorite instructors, is teaching gazpacho, that favorite sort of garden soup. That's next week on August 13. So just a few things that are coming up. And then there's a comment here too, Carolyn, that might be interesting for us to consider. She says she'd love a class in the future on more calming anti-anxiety plants.
Mm-hmm.
As well as antivirals.
Yep.
So we might consider chatting about that, Carolyn.
Sure. Yeah, I do a whole botanical emotional wellness class that a lot of people like. So that would be ready to go. I will show, let me see here.
Also on anti-inflammatory herbs. So
There's a lot. Yeah, so look up that Herb Rally. Henriette's Herbal homepage is another good Source. That's Henriette with an H. But I just wanted to share quick my website. This is my email. Feel free to contact me with questions on my email. You can send me a message if you'd like to be added to my email list, or you can sign up directly on my website. If you want to be on a mailing list, I do probably every 6 months, so I wouldn't flood out your inbox at all. But if you're interested in that, go ahead and sign up or let me know. Yeah, and there is a, are we doing an immunity, herbs for immunity class in October, Mike?
That's
So
correct.
if you're interested in herbs for the immune system, we'll talk about immune support specifically then at that class.
Which will be good timing because it'll be in October.
Yes,
We
for
had
transition
a flu
season.
season, but also just in terms of COVID. So
Yeah.
can you please repeat the Henrietta? What was that one?
Let me just type it.
You can type it in the chat box, Carolyn. And as far as the class I mentioned, Leah, farmtablefoundation.org program page has all of our upcoming classes, if that's what you're referring to. And then we've got Henriette's Herbal homepage.
Yeah, just Google that. You should find it.
Great.
It's kind of an old school website. Doesn't look very updated, but there's a ton of information compiled there, and it's great resource. It's hard to know with the internet, what resources are reliable and what information you're getting from where. So those are a couple good places to start if you're not quite sure what you're looking at. Yep. And again, United Plant Savers is a great resource. Again, based out of Ohio. That's Rosemary Gladstar's organization on conserving overused and overharvested plants. And there's a lot of great resources there on that website too.
Well, Carolyn, thanks so much. One more question and lots of thanks coming in, but is shea butter a good option to beeswax?
Yes. Yep. And shea butter will have that, again, kind of like coconut oil, but a little firmer. It'll have with a shea butter. It's a little harder to work with, but it's a great option. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you. And Carolyn, thank you for your time, and thank us for joining us. And
you're welcome.
We're really appreciating it.
Good. Well, thank you all for joining, and I hope you go make a salve and go find some plantain and try it. Even if you just try the leaf, next time you get a mosquito bite, find a plantain leaf and put it on there. It's just one of those that just works so fast and so well. It's a great experience. So definitely try it.
Very good. Well,
all right,
everyone, thank you for joining us. Take care.
Yep. Have a good night, everybody. Thank you.